Welcome to Week Old Beans episode. I like that I have to check to see what episode we're on before.
You could just prep by knowing what the episode is, because every time
27!
you explicitly.
27. Episode 27. What was that voice that we just heard? I don't know. Somebody talking in the background. I don't know what they said. Um, I'm RDOT, and I have my host with me, Fowler. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Fowler? Tell the people what you're really about.
You already introduced me. All
Why
you need
don't
to know
you?
is my name. Everything else will be demonstrated through my superior verbal skills.
Okay. Well, I'm RDOT. That was Fowler. Um, so to be completely real for y'all, it's been a slow ass news week. And so we're really just gonna shoot the shit for like an hour because fuck it, why not? That's not like people are watching this anyway. No, but we do have a couple things we're gonna just very briefly chat about. A lot of stuff, a lot of. It's almost like the problem with like 24-hour news and with social media is that you get exposed to so much information and only like 0.1% of it is actually consequential or useful in any meaningful way. Would you agree with me, Fowler, on that?
Well, yeah, we could talk about that. That's a very interesting subject, I think.
Oh, I didn't suggest. Okay, cool. Look at us coming up with stuff. Why don't you? Because this is more your field, Fowler. Like you have more evidence based um, data on stuff like this. I'm going to let you take this away. Explain to the people why 24-hour news and social media is dog shit when it comes to politics and gathering information.
Well, back in the day, like during colonial times, there were newspapers that would run monthly. And then if anything important happened that they felt the people needed to know about, they would do a special issue. But it's just not the case anymore. There was a time and place when, um, you could only get the news once a month and you'd be fine. But because of living in the information age, there's so much information at all times, and the world is so complicated that we have to build this enormous infrastructure in order to give us information all the time. That's the idealist approach. The other one, some people might argue that actually all this information isn't necessary and it's a scam in order to sell advertisers and create industries that have no real purpose.
That honestly, I think is it's hard. I think it's really hard to. I mean, this is gonna sound like such a cheesy reference, and you're gonna laugh at me when I say this, but it really is the question of like being inside the matrix, right? Um, where everything is kind of an illusion. Um,
What are you talking
shut,
about?
shut. Let me finish my point before you start rattling off. All right. What I mean by that is, like, you know how in the Matrix, you're hooked up and you're living your life, and then you take the blue pill, red pill. One of the pills lets you stay in the Matrix and be oblivious. The other lets you wake up to reality. I think it's a similar situation um, with 24-hour news and social media, where there are all these events taking place. Obviously, unlike in the Matrix, these are real things that are happening. I'm not suggesting that like you know media is like fake, like it's like crisis actors and shit like that. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that like you know in the grand scheme of things, being able to see, for example, um, a discussion between a woman and a group of guys about whose bike is what, and then that gets blasted across social media, and then the woman loses her job, and then of course we all learn that it was it's not what it seemed. But like in the grand scheme of things, like none of that shit has any bearing on anything, but we'll spend a week having discourse about it, both on sort of the both on the internet, which at this point has become the public square, um and in mainstream news too. When in reality, like that shit like has nothing. it has no bearing on anybody's quality of life, except I guess for the woman whose life almost got ruined because of vengeful assholes on social media. But like, you'll put so much of your energy into it. People writing fucking essays about this shit and about the meta analysis or whatever, and it doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't really mean, it makes no difference um, in the average person's life. Does that make any sense, or did I bungle that, Fowler?
I'm not sure what you mean.
I think you're pretending because your IQ is not high enough to understand my point. That's what I'll say to that.
Are you going to try and rephrase it, or is
No,
that
I'm leaving
have
it
you
at that,
given
and I'm
up?
gonna let you take what you got from that and try to extrapolate as much as you can from it because I'm not saying it again. The people that got it will get it, okay? And the people that don't got it will not have it, and they'll ask questions in the comments. Then I'll explain further.
You're killing it on all fronts. Not only are you making a lot of sense, but you're grammatically correct too.
Shut the fuck up. I'm tired. I've had a long 7 days. Forgive me if my grammar is not up to par. Why don't you explain what I was trying to say to the people? Because I
I
know
have
you
no
understood it.
idea what you're trying. I have no idea what you're trying to say.
Life is like the Matrix, except not really. Uh, there's a lot of things on the internet that are useless and stupid and don't actually mean anything. That's the short version of what I was trying to say. Savvy?
Good to know. Good to know.
Okay, this is your show. I'm letting you have the field on this because you have actual data to back up what I'm saying. Um,
Well, I think it's so like I think it has to be remembered like back in the day, I think it was Truman against Dewey was the first time that we had like polling information. So like before all of that, there was no real way of knowing what the people believed. Like you had to sort of anecdotally guess based on the information that you would get by talking to people. So like the polling, regular polling, the um the like 24-hour news, like all these things are kind of new designs that make it, I think, in some ways easier for politicians to message, but also make a lot of those media companies a tremendous amount of money. So it's sort of an interesting ecosystem that didn't exist back in the day.
yeah, well, and I think for the average person, the danger of it is that you can really discourage yourself and you can really fall into rabbit holes and mindsets that I think beforehand you probably wouldn't have naturally fallen into. You can fall into echo chambers as well. You can consume news sources and just sources in general that reaffirm your prior biases, which, beforehand you couldn't really do. I mean, it was very difficult to find echo chambers. You were kind of forced to be exposed to, um, different points of view. Um, mostly because of the lack of media, but then also just because, like, you got your newspaper, whatever the newspaper said was what you got. Um, it wasn't really until probably the radio that, you know, sort of constant news became a thing.
Yeah, I'm back and forth about it. I've been reading a really good book called The Image by Daniel Boorstin, where Boorstin is like really against the 24-hour news. He views it as like a fucking cancer on society. And I don't know if I would go that far, but I think it is interesting. Like I think the 24 hours news cycle really benefits politicians, particularly kind of the more outrageous like Trumpian politicians. But I'm not sure if there's that much of a utility. Like, is following the news, and I say this as a person who follows the news constantly, is following the news necessarily that useful Like, would it matter if you learned about George Santos being expelled that week or that day? You know, and I'm kind of mixed about that.
Well, on maybe a counter to that could be like, like George Santos is, I think, a perfect example of somebody who, without 24-hour news and without sort of this media, and when I say 24-hour news, I think we've created a media atmosphere where news happens obviously traditionally. So you have traditional news, which is obviously like, the 24-hour cable news cycle, MSNBC, Fox News, CNN, OAN, all the other, even BBC to an extent, all these other news sources in the United States and abroad as well. But then also you have like non-traditional news that takes place on YouTube, Twitch, like BreadTube, Twitch streamers, YouTube streamers, podcasters, um, uh, you know, uh, people who talk about the news non-traditionally. And then like of course social media like Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. So there's sort of three different, I guess, bubbles that exist that deliver us news nowadays. Um, but kind of not so much to argue against your point, but to I guess offer an alternative point of view, you know, knowing about George Santos might not really be beneficial, but George Santos, his expulsion is a direct consequence of the 24-hour news cycle. I mean, if George Santos back in the day, let's say George Santos had been wilding out back before contemporary news, he might not have been expelled because the media backlash from his shenanigans probably would have never been exposed. Um, it was
But
the fact.
also, would a George Santos figure who peddles conspiracy theories and is outrageous, would he have even been a congressman without
True.
24-hour news?
Exactly. It's I think, yeah, no, you're absolutely right about that. It goes both ways, you know what I mean? It can be the savior and it can be the sword that stabs you in the back if you're not careful. You know.
Yeah, and it's the 24-hour news system is very strange also because like the amount of people doing reporting is smaller and smaller, but the amount of news that is being created and produced is larger and larger. It's kind of a weird reverse pyramid where it's a tiny amount of guys on the ground who are actually gathering the relevant information, and then it's huge amounts of commentators and papers that are kind of regurgitating the same information in order to like create kind of clickbait basically.
Yeah, no, that's and finding, like relevant topics to talk about instead of just, doing what you just said, regurgitating. I think that's the toughest thing if you're someone that's trying to create engaging and interesting content that centers around news and politics. I mean, I'm speaking from experience. You know, I'm currently working on content for this channel, and what I keep running into is it's not the lack of stuff to talk about, it's so much of the things that I could be talking about have been regurgitated by different people. And, you know, I feel like I'm a very, somewhat of a OCD perfectionist, and I'll look at a topic and then I'll think to myself, damn, there's probably someone who said this better than I have. Um, what perspective am I offering that's new and fresh and going to actually make people want to, watch? And then also, is my voice regurgitating the same information? Is it really actually contributing to the spread of that info, or is it just going to be added to the noise? Um, it's why I don't really, I mean, I think on this podcast too, it's why I think Fowler and I sometimes struggle to talk about like pop culture events, like because it's just going to get added to the noise. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's definitely a complicated issue, and it's very much one where the media and the politicians are complicit in making, both in a positive way and a negative way, the situation more extreme.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So
I
it's
think this is sort of against our business model in a sense because we need people to consume our news, but I've been trying much more aggressively, like to not be in the 24-hour news cycle. Like I try and consume only news that I think is useful. So I ignore stories that are about subjects that I'm not like I don't think are interesting or useful, like Bitcoin or anything involving Elon Musk, really. And I try not to focus on like day by day coverage about things that I can just sort of summarize in a larger sense. Like I haven't been really closely following the Trump trial stuff because I don't think it's necessarily useful for me to know the day to day operations. Like I want to know the broad strokes, but I don't necessarily want to know like the details and have that consume my life.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I mean, I think with issues like, for example, the Trump stuff, like the only way I know I don't consume it either because I know the only way I'm going to be satisfied is if he gets a conviction and is not allowed to run in the election. That's that I know that that is what I want and that is what is going to satisfy me. So watching the day by day, if that's not the outcome that we get, then I'm not going to feel like I'm going to feel like I wasted my time. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
this might be
we'll
a good time to pivot into the Trump stuff because one piece of news that I did see that I think is important is him listing out his cabinet, which I think has a lot of very interesting implications.
nightmare blunt rotation.
Yeah, like it's like crazy stuff like Steve Bannon, who is a white nationalist, being his chief of staff,
Stephen
Tucker
Miller.
Carlson being, yeah,
Potentially as
Stephen
a
Miller.
VP. I don't know. I will say I don't know if he's confirmed Tucker as his VP. I think the last piece of news I read about it was that Melania had suggested that he should be the VP. Um, but I don't know if it's confirmed. But I mean, it is nightmare blunt rotation.
So for those who haven't who were sort of introduced to politics later, one of the problems Trump had was his administration in 2016 to 2020 was extremely bad. Like it was not just that people were incompetent and corrupt, although they were, but it was that like he had placed a lot of people into power who were diametrically opposed to each other and were fighting each other. Like one of the reasons there's constant leaking in the Trump era was because like you had the normal rhino Republicans who were loyal to the party, you had the crazy Trumpers, you had the business guys, you had the military people, and so it was this thing where there was no cohesive vision for the Trump administration. It was all these little factions who were constantly fighting each other. But and that really helped our country because Trump was not able to really do much as a president because he didn't have a unified cabinet and he couldn't really get them to focus on the same goals. And a lot of the worst people in the Trump administration, like Bannon, were pushed out of power by their rivals. But Trump's new cabinet does not have that problem. They're all crazy, they're all Trumpers, and a lot of them are anti-democracy. So, like, if he wins, there won't be like a bunch of military guys and like classic Republicans running interference, which is one of the things that saved our democracy during his first term.
Yeah, it's incredibly scary shit. It's incredibly concerning. I mean, I said this to you, Fowler, before we even filmed this. I mean, you and I have talked in length about our frustrations with the Democratic Party, and I will openly express those frustrations on this podcast. But I've noticed an uptick in the amount of articles that are kind of blaring the sirens um, about Trump being a fascist and being wanting to be a dictator. And these were not articles being written a year ago. I mean, a year ago it was, the strategy I think was to try and ignore Trump. Um, and just hope he kind of, crawled away in disgrace. Or covering, a year ago it was trying to cover any sort of legal action that he was getting into, but then sort of not really, not really placing any sort of like ethical or moral judgment on the actions themselves. Um, but now the
A
I
lot
can
of it is I think he's become more and more blatant. Like
yes, absolutely.
he has just said things that are way worse than before. I mean, we talked earlier in the year about him describing the Democrats and his political opponents as vermin. We talked about him and cleansing them. We talked about how he Um, he was saying that he was going to use the attorney general and the justice department as a weapon to attack his political enemies. So I think he's just become, even for the mainstream media who are pretty incompetent and not particularly educated about the whole problem of fascism, I think even they are seeing smoke.
Yeah, and it's just a matter of have they seen smoke too late? That's what it's going to be. I mean, better now than never. I mean, we still have a year until the election, November 11th. We've got a little less than a year, um, and a lot. I mean, as we know, a lot can happen in a short span of time. It's not looking good for Biden right now, and this Israel Palestine shit is not helping him. Uh,
Have we talked about Biden's reaction to Israel and Palestine, or have we not? I'm
I
trying
mean,
to
his
remember.
reaction is, I don't think we've actually talked about his reaction. I think we've talked about the conflict, but we've not really talked about his reaction. Although there's not much to really talk about because he doesn't really have a reaction besides bending over and doing whatever Netanyahu tells him to do. Or really, approving every aid, to the, I feel like there's nothing really to talk about because his reaction is basically a non-reaction. Um, it's certainly not the reaction that a lot of people are hoping from him, and it's certainly not, helping. Um, it's certainly not helping him. I
Yeah,
think.
Biden is normally quite good on foreign policy. I mean, he wanted to pull out of Afghanistan. He was for protecting Taiwan. He was really good on Ukraine. But for whatever reason, he is extremely conservative and pro-Israel. And it's creating a lot of problems with Muslim Americans who we need in places like Detroit in order to win the next election. And it's really hurting him with young people where the Israel Palestine war is extremely unpopular.
Yeah. Well, and it's certainly not hurting. It's certainly hurting his polling because I don't know if you. This is the most recent 538 poll that I'm reading, Fowler. He's at 55.5 disapproval rating.
With the general public or with Democrats?
Um. So 538 basically assembles. The way they get their data is they just basically aggregate all of the polls, and they combine it into one percentage, and that's this is a combination of every poll that's been done. In every poll that's been done, and let me see if they list the. Let me see if they list the. Um, yeah, Gallup, YouGov, Morning Consult, Russaman. I think Russaman is conservative. Ledger, YouGov, News Nation, RMG, Morning Consult, Activote, SSRS. But he's like, I'm reading all the different polls that they've aggregated, and in every single poll, he has a strong disapproval rating in every single one, regardless of their political affiliation.
Yeah, not ideal.
Like it's not even like like it doesn't really matter who does the poll in every single one. He has a disapproval. I'm assuming the ones with higher disapproval ratings are probably conservative polls. I mean, there's one that's like 38 to 62. Um, but yeah, not good. Definitely not good. Um, I mean, around this same time, Trump was Trump's approval was 41 and Biden's was 38 around the same time when Trump was president. But
Yeah, just not ideal.
no, and it's I mean I'm I'm not gonna sit here and toot my horn at Biden because he's um he has made blunders that are his alone. I will say. Um, so it's just a matter of what will the Democratic Party do? And how will they try to remedy this, or will they try to remedy this? Um, And what can they do to remedy this? I mean, I don't really, I think the fundamental issue right now is that it's Biden that people don't like. It's not, the Democrats and their ideology. It's him as an individual that people are just not fond of. And, in a weird way, like, I don't get it because, to be honest with you, economically, we're not doing that poorly. But I think the issue is that we just have not managed to recover that strong middle class that was absolutely devastated during COVID. Um, and we've shifted, we're there is really no moderate, like most people now, I don't really feel like, are moderates. I think there's still a percentage of like moderate, like well to do upper middle class people, but for the most part, like it's either one or the other.
Yeah, Biden, I mean, the president often is the figurehead, and so he gets all the attention. But Biden has done a bunch of things that I think have made it more of a thing. Like him creating the Bidenomics plan has sort of made him the face of the economy, for better or for worse.
Yeah. Well, and the problem with the economy, and I think this is sort of, this is the issue. Like, you and I have talked about Fowler. Like, most people, the economy is incredibly complex. It's an incredibly complex apparatus. The federal government is an incredibly complex apparatus. I mean, the fact that Vivek Ramaswamy can say, and I mean, I there was something that he tweeted that I just laughed at because he basically it was like the two things were not related to each other. It was him basically saying like the federal government is this. This is why I'm going to do this completely unrelated thing to remedy this problem. And the thing he was referencing was firing 1,000 federal employees. Um,
Is this the thing where he said like he would fire everyone with like an odd number, social security
no, this was
number?
something new that he said, but it was just funny because it's like, I wish I could find it. I have to go on Twitter to find it. But it was just like, I was laughing at it because it was like the two things that he talked about had nothing to do with one another. Like him firing those 1,000 employees would not fix the problem. It would just it would just make the problem worse. Um, um, God, where is it? God, it's probably all the way down because he tweets so fucking much, dude. Um, yeah, but it was just, but I think like the economy is an incredibly complex issue, and so I mean, I don't even understand fully how the economy works, quote unquote. Um, and I'm in no position to make economic. I mean, until I understand it a little bit better, I'm in no position to make, economic qualifications. But to be honest with you, a lot of economists are also not in the position to make um, economic qualifications. Um, like economists themselves, like being an economist is um, it's an incredibly, I guess, contentious field to be in because fucking you can be an economist and be on Fox News for 40 years and get every prediction incorrect and still have a job. It's um,
Well, there's no media figures. There's no real
it's a real
like
accountability.
yeah accountability for what they're doing. They're the fourth estate, but also there's no checks and balances for them.
Yeah,
I think that, and I think Fox News is a great example of that. Of like, because they're the fourth estate, they were able to push the meter and create all this misinformation and lie about the election, but there isn't really a way to check them. Well,
yeah.
except for
Well,
suing the shit out of them, I guess.
yeah. Well, and by then it's usually too late. What is so? Did you just say the fourth estate?
Yeah,
Could you
some
explain what that
historians and
means?
some so there's normally three estates, but some historians called the press the fourth estate by saying that it should be viewed as basically like like the judiciary or the legislative or the executive, as like the fourth great power in a political system in a republic.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense, and you're right. I mean, and I think nowadays you can expand that media to the three spheres the three bubbles that I mentioned earlier about, alternative media, Twitter, podcast, YouTube, BreadTube, Twitch, streamers, all that. Um, and then of course like, traditional cable, and then the sort of like literary written social media space of like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, I guess TikTok as well, although TikTok is audiovisual and literary, but um, that I think you're absolutely right about it being a fourth estate. It's just, the fourth estate has its own little, even within the fourth estate, there's three branches perhaps, but um, yeah, there really isn't a way to check media powers, and it's there have been laws in the past um, that have been proposed to try to curb that, but they've just never really come to fruition, or maybe they were introduced too early. Obviously, I think the one everybody's going to think about, and it's one um, that's come up before. It was the fairness doctrine that Bill Clinton, I think it was um, the fair, yeah, it was I think during the Clinton administration. No, it was introduced in 1949, and then it was abolished in 87. I think under the Clinton administration. Um, do you know the details of this, Fowler?
I don't think so.
So the fairness doctrine, it was introduced in 49. Uh,
Oh, this
of,
is the Reagan era thing that means that you have to give both sides of the argument when presenting political topics, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Um, 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 I think it was reconsidered in 2005. Um, and then I think in 2008, it was reintroduced again in 2008. Nancy Pelosi. Um,
I have mixed feelings about the fairness doctrine because, I mean, we're both radicals in our own way, and I don't necessarily care about like the conservative both sidedism, especially now that the conservative position is anti-democratic. But it's the other problem I think the fairness doctrine has is I don't think it's a very effective way of like making money. Like I think the fairness doctrine news is a lot less memey and a lot less like eye catching. And I think like people wouldn't watch the news. And I think people didn't watch the news really to the same degree when the doctrine was sort of a thing.
well, it was 47 when it was introduced. Which was way before, sort of, I think it was right at the beginning of sort of this 24-hour news cycle, um, and, mass news consumption. And then it was abolished in 87, and then it's been reintroduced a couple of times. It's never really passed. 87 was around the time that 24-hour news became heavily established, I think, 87, 90s. And then, now we've just seen a complete shift where so I don't know. I mean, I don't, my opinion on it is like, I guess it's a matter of like, do you care? How much do you care about people viewing the news? You know what I mean? Because then if it was, brought back and less people watched the news, or less people became interested in the news, depending on what your bottom line is and what you want, that could either be a really, really bad thing. Obviously, if you're in it for profit, if you're somebody who's in it because you want to make a lot of money, that's going to suck. But if you're someone who's maybe in it for other reasons that might benefit you. So I think it just depends on the it depends on what you want. You know what I mean? I don't think it'll ever pass because I think media and we've allowed the media to grow so powerful and so sort of omnipresent that like they would never they would find a way to make sure it never reached the president's desk in the first place, which they probably couldn't do in the 1940s.
Yeah, I don't know. I would have to look more into it, but the fairness doctrine, I think it was put in place by the fact radio was basically like a wild card, and you could say and do really whatever you wanted while being in the radio,
Yeah,
because that was the era of like the radio demagogue, so to speak.
yeah. It was also used by I think Johnson to go after political opponents as well, or to curb political opponents in the media.
Makes
Um,
sense.
so I don't know. I mean, that's the fairness doctrine. It's popped up in 2008. It's not really made a comeback. I mean, the fact that it was around for from 47 to 87 is was it 57? Let me check and make sure. I think it was 40. Did I say 47?
I don't. I think so.
Yeah, no, 49 to 87 is officially when it was in, and that's a pretty large stretch of American history. That's Vietnam, that's, Korean War, that's um post World War II. Um so I wonder if if it would be interesting to do some research into like how news was affected during that time period by that doctrine. Because Fowler and I both like I know of the fairness doctrine because I've researched it in the past, but I know about the clauses and legality of it. I don't really know a lot about how it directly impacted news during that time period.
Well, I think from what I remember, like news didn't have to be profitable back in the day. Like they forced stations to cover politics, and the deal was basically like you're not going to make any money off of it, but you're legally obligated to do it, basically.
Hmm. Well, I guess yeah, because they didn't really have advertisers back then. Um, which speaking of advertisers, we can make you want to segue into the Elon Musk stuff. We got
Sure.
about 10. We got
What
about
time are
10.
we?
We got about 10 minutes left, so we can spend the last 10 talking about this because this is relevant to what we're talking about since we're talking about news and profit and platforms, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to let you take this one away, Fowler.
Know as much about the Elon thing. It might be good for you to do it.
Oh, I mean, it's fairly simple. I mean, it's not really that tantalizing of a story. Um, Elon Musk made a post on Twitter where he basically you told me about it, Fowler. What was the tweet exactly?
Is this the thing, the anti-Semitism, or is this
Yeah, this
something
is the
else?
anti-Semitism thing started this bullshit. Um, he
He
made
basically said he liked and commented on a tweet where basically someone was like implying that the um that like it was hypocritical that Jews were pushing for anti for not having anti-Semitism in the country because Jews were pushing anti-white hate, and he basically liked that tweet, and he basically like
co-signed
signal
it.
boosted it. Yeah,
Um,
which if people don't know, like one of the oldest conspiracy theories in the world is that the Jews are anti-white and that they, through a variety of weird population control bullshit, are basically um are they're basically like weakening the white man through their manipulative powers.
yeah, and so the fallout of this, um, yeah, tweet Elon Musk responded to the actual tweet and said, "You have said the actual truth." So he didn't just signal boost it; he directly responded and co-signed it. Um,
Yeah.
uh, And so the blowback from this was immediate. Multiple advertisers pulled their multiple companies pulled their advertisements from Twitter. Um, this is like the second time this has happened. I think there was something that happened a few months ago. Yeah, a bunch of news organizations pulled from Twitter. So I think it was like a dozen advertisers stated they were pulling their advertisements from Twitter. IBM, Disney, um, I think Apple too was one of them.
Yeah.
But all massive corporations. And Elon Musk responded by by basically, I guess he was at a oh yeah, Comcast, Warner Bros, Discovery, Lionsgate, NBC Universal, um, many more. Um, and then Elon Musk tried to go on like a Backstreet Boys, I guess, Israel tour. To I guess apologize for the tweet or whatever. Um, and then just a couple days ago, he let me see where he was. Um, it's during some interview, fucking I don't know where he was. He was at I think it was like a Look Summit for New York Times or whatever, and he basically told the advertisers to go fuck themselves. And I mean, the video is kind of surreal because like it looks like he's having a mental breakdown while he's talking. Um,
Well,
Nobody
he
like
didn't basically tell them to go fuck themselves. He literally
yeah, he
told them to
literally
go fuck
said
themselves.
he didn't just say go fuck. He said it three times specifically, on three separate occasions, and then he also called out. He said go fuck yourself, and then he also said Bob, or what did he say? Um, oh yeah, is that clear? Hey Bob, if you're in the audience, that's how I feel. Bob referencing Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney. Um, um, the interview is crazy. If you get the chance to watch it, it's because the dude who's interviewing him is basically saying like, "Hey Elon, like you do know that like your company needs advertisers in order to make a profit." And Elon Musk is basically like, "Oh, like if Twitter collapses, everybody's going to know that it was the advertisers that collapsed it." Um and the interviewer follows it up by saying like, well, actually people are kind of gonna probably look to you and say, hey Elon, you collapsed the website because of your endorsement of an obviously anti-Semitic post and the fact that you told those advertisers to go fuck themselves. uh so it was just very surreal. And I mean, I don't I mean, I guess, like it's one of those things. Like I said, I mean, Fowler and I were talking about it beforehand. Like, should we even talk about it? Because it is just like feel vaguely upset, making fun of a clearly disturbed individual. Because that's all I can think of. But do you have any commentary on that, Fowler?
Yeah, I mean,
Oh, also, can I
Elon
say
Musk
one more
is
thing? Can I add something else? He says
what?
all this, by the way, and sitting next to him, or at least sitting in the audience next to him, is the new CEO of Twitter, or I guess X, Linda Yaccarino, who was specifically brought on to woo back advertisers uh, a couple months ago.
Well, Elon has demonstrated himself to be massively incompetent. I think part of it is he's very good at like funding and pushing startups, but the day-to-day operations element of running an already established company just seems beyond him to be able to do it.
Yeah, he's I've heard some reports that apparently he's incredibly narcissistic and like takes things really personally, and that like he takes things very personally. So, I can't remember what it was that I read that basically like something happened on Twitter a couple months ago and he barricaded himself into the fuck in his fucking office, and his aides and staffers considered calling like a wellness check on him because he wouldn't come out. And it was because of something that had happened on Twitter. Um, you know what I mean? Like It wasn't even
Yeah,
like a personal. It was something that happened with Twitter, like some controversy that happened. Um, and he took it so personally that he almost got a fucking wellness check called on him. Um, so it just seems like he's just that type of person. Um, but I agree with you, Fowler. Like I think Elon was always brilliant at startups and things that didn't really involve a large amount of public pressure. I think running a social media website and then making yourself the face of it, that's a skill that involves media training and you know it involves media training and it involves a certain amount of charisma and personality and social awareness. And I think Elon was always somebody who was behind the scenes, stuck in the shadows. His projects beforehand were always very tech based. They were not very people based, which is fine. I more power to him. I mean, it's impressive what he did with Tesla. I will not knock his abilities, but I think this is an example of someone who is out of their who purchased a social media website, tried to do it the way he thought it should be done, and then found out very quickly that he is way out of his element. That the rules of social media, the rules of advertising, the rules of the three bubbles and the fourth, what is it, the fourth state?
the
Um,
fourth estate.
the
Yeah.
fourth estate is very different than running a car company. It's a very different ball game, and it requires a very different skill set. And he's never struck me as someone who's had his abilities challenged. He strikes me as someone who is, and I think this is in part because he inherited a lot of his money. He's always kind of been a success. And so, I mean, I guess I can't fault him for thinking that he would do well with this, but I think he's learning very quickly that the rules are very different.
Yeah, he's yeah, I think that part of it is him overestimating himself. And I think part of it is that he himself is radicalized. Like I don't believe him being an anti-Semite is some sort of like 10,000 IQ maneuver. I think he's just an anti-Semite, and that means that he has some pretty sussy takes. And one of the problems with radicalization is you don't know that you're radicalized so oftentimes until it's too late. So it could be that his like whatever he's been consuming has made him like believe in these sort of anti-Semitic truths, and until he basically put pen to paper and said it, he was like not really prepared for that information being having him have any blowback.
Yeah, well, and
And
I
Elon
definitely
has a
think,
long history of saying kind of sussy things that indicate that he's like kind of a far right ideologue. So I think this is just the natural continuation of that.
well, I definitely think it's a matter of like, I think you're right about that, and then I also think like, I was not one of those people that was involved in the exodus of X. I did not leave when he purchased the company. Um, I did not leave when he rebranded it. I still do have a Twitter account, and I don't post on it, but I look at it, and I think it was a couple. It was when he rebranded and changed the name that he made it so that if you are on X, you have to follow him. You don't. I think it automatically follows Elon Musk. Um, and even beforehand, like his tweets would get mad engagement. So, but I have noticed a shift. Like I've noticed since he bought the company, you know, that he has shifted farther and farther and farther and farther to the right. Even if he was already on the right, which I'm sure he was when he got the company, he's definitely shifted farther than he ever was when he first bought it. And I feel like you can tell by the way he's running the company, and you can tell by the tweets that he's been making. Um, I mean, we're not even going to talk about the Grand Theft Auto tweet because that's a whole shit show. I mean, for those of you who don't know, he pissed off the gamers, which was not a smart move. Uh, um, by disparaging GTA 6. And I think he currently has like the most ratio tweet fucking ever on the fucking website. Um, but I mean, I think what I suspect could have happened is that he wanted X or Twitter to be, he truly believed that, that Twitter was the public square and that it should be unregulated and that it should be, you should be allowed to say whatever you want with no consequence. So he made all these changes. The natural consequence of that, as has been the natural consequence of the unregulated internet, even back when you and I, Fowler, were younger, is that people don't want to like see Nazi posting, so people will just leave the website, and then those Nazis will just stay and they will take over their claimed territory. And I think, he just, because of that exposure, became farther and farther radicalized until he was JQ posting. And he doesn't strike me as somebody who's very self aware. So, I mean, I don't even know, like, if he's aware. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, I think that's the risk, though. Like there were at the height of of the alt right, there were so many figures who were accidentally in the alt right, and I don't think realized that they were. Like Anthony Fantano, who I think is like probably the best music reviewer on the site. He was flying the Kekistani flag. He was like a pretty hardcore anti-SJW. So I think it's easy to fall into those paths, and you just don't know until it's a little too late that you are what you believe is sort of insanity. And I think a lot of like the gamer types are the ones who are particularly at risk for that because they like are a little bit more insular and might not realize the consequences of some of their actions.
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%. Well, actually, we're at the 50-minute mark. We managed to fill up that time slot. We were both worried that we wouldn't be able to do it, but we did. Um, And we see, Fowler, you need to have more faith in our improvisational skills because you're always freaking out that we don't have a topic. And then when we don't have a topic, we produce some of the best fucking podcasting we've ever produced.
I mean, we will see how this does.
Have some faith, my friend. Have some faith. But we're going to sign out. Fowler, do you want to go ahead and sign us out?
We are Week Old Beans, the top bean podcast in America.
Absolutely. We're going to have a bean review for you next week. We're going to talk about all sorts of good beans: butter beans, black eyed peas. Is black eyed peas a bean? It is. Black eyed peas. We're going to talk about string beans, edamame,
Edamame is good shit.
chickpeas. We're
Don't
going to
want
talk
to
about
dox myself,
pinto
but
beans.
edamame is good shit.
Yeah, we know. Yeah, you've already doxed yourself by that statement alone. We know you enjoy edamame. Um, oh shit, what else? Pinto beans, my favorite. Not to dox myself. Um, love me some pinto beans. Love me some black eyed peas too. Not to dox myself either.
Just a quick aside though. What is that? What is that? Uh, fast food burrito place.
Taco
They
Bell.
have no.
Del Taco.
No.
Chipotle.
Chipotle, that's it.
That's
Their
Chipotle's not a
food
burrito place. What the fuck?
it
Chipotle
is.
sells.
It's a
No, it's
burrito and
not. They
taco
sell
place.
bowls. That's what they're known for.
You're wrong. You're
All
just
right. Yeah.
wrong.
Whatever. Fucking eat Chipotle and get E. coli from their lettuce.
It's worth it.
No, it's not. I've had Chipotle. And considering where I live, I can get good Mexican food anytime. So, or good just Latin American food any fucking time. So, Chipotle's gourmet where you are. I know where you live. I know that Chipotle is as good as you're gonna get up there. So, down there, anywhere, wherever the fuck you live. Are you gonna sign us out, or are you gonna just sit there because I roasted you too hard?
I am Fowler. The other person is Ardot, and I will endeavor to teach Ardot things that they will be aware of, and then they will publicly
Why did you
apologize
use
for
they?
getting
You can you can use my correct pronouns. You transphobe. She her.
it.
You don't have to. You don't have to. Like
we
it's
will we
fine. Like
will
it's
we will we will deprogram Ardot, and she will publicly apologize the
for
next time we
dissing
do this
Chipotle.
podcast.
Okay, I'm sure the Chipotle CEO is watching this. Like, oh shit. Oh shit. But anyway, as Fowler said, I'm R. Dot. That's Fowler. we will see you guys in the next video.